How an asteroid extinguished the dinosaurs and saved the mammals. Every person on this planet has heard the story of the asteroid that collided with Earth and completely decimated the dinosaurs. But the truly interesting story, the one almost no one tells, is the other side, the animals that weren't supposed to survive, that by all logic weren't equipped for it, and that somehow became the ancestors of everything that matters on this planet. Why did mammals actually survive the event that destroyed 3/4 of all life on Earth? The answer has nothing to do with strength, intelligence, or any evolutionary advantage you might expect. It is the result of a chain of events so specific and so improbable that once you truly understand it, it will be hard to believe it even happened. To understand the miracle, you first need to understand the humiliation. Mammals did not emerge after the dinosaurs. This misconception seems small, but it distorts everything. The ancestors of mammals, the therapsids, existed before the dinosaurs themselves. In the Triassic, over 250 million years ago, they were the dominant animals on the planet, diverse, adapted, and successful. Then the dinosaurs emerged. The therapsids were swept from their dominant positions. Those that survived shrank. They became smaller, more discreet, more invisible. Over tens of millions of years, these survivors became the first true mammals. And from the beginning, they carried the mark of what had happened. They were animals built by defeat. But something was happening to the planet that made the situation even more precarious than it appeared at first glance. In the final millions of years before the impact, Earth was already undergoing geological stress that most people never hear about in this context. India, then a drifting island moving across the ocean toward the Asian continent, was passing over a hot spot in the Earth's mantle. The result was one of the largest volcanic events in the planet's history, the Deccan Traps, a lava flow that covered an area larger than all of Western Europe and, over hundreds of thousands of years, released colossal amounts of carbon dioxide and sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere. Gradual warming, changes in rainfall patterns, slow acidification of the oceans. Some dinosaur lineages were likely already in a gentle decline. The late Cretaceous world was a world under pressure, not collapsing, but trembling at the edges. Mammals were relatively indifferent. Creatures that had evolved under extreme pressure for tens of millions of years are not easily disturbed by gradual climate changes. They were already operating at the limit. But here is what transformed this accumulated disadvantage into something completely different. There is a phenomenon that researchers have described with a very specific name, the Nocturnal Bottleneck. The hypothesis, published in the journal Proceedings of the Royal Society, maintains that the ancestors of practically all placental mammals spent a period of at least 150 million years living strictly nocturnal lives, not by choice, by necessity. Any mammal visible during the day became a target. Visibility was death. Evolution, over geological eras, systematically eliminated diurnal mammals and preserved the nocturnal ones. The result was not just behavioral, it was physical, structural, permanent. The retina of most mammals is fundamentally different from the retina of reptiles and birds. Reptiles have retinas dominated by cones, high-resolution, color-sensitive cells built for sharp daytime vision. Most mammals have retinas dominated by rods, low-light sensors efficient in the dark, but much less capable with intense light and colors. It is not incomplete evolution. It is a scar from eras spent in fear in the dark. To make this concrete in a way you won't forget, a pigeon sees 4 primary color channels. You see 3, and only 3 because primates much later recovered part of what had been lost. A dog sees 2, a rat 2. You inherited the eyes of an animal that learned to hide in the dark before the dinosaurs even existed. What evolution took from one side, it compensated for on the other with interest. To replace daytime vision, mammals developed a sense of smell of unparalleled complexity in the animal kingdom. They developed high-frequency hearing, capable of capturing sounds that dinosaurs simply did not process. They developed vibrissae, the tactile whiskers we see in cats and rats today, which map space in absolute darkness like a second pair of eyes. They developed progressively larger brains to integrate all this sensory information that had to replace vision. In the Cretaceous, all of this was just the price of survival on a planet dominated by others. No one would know for another 66 million years that it was exactly this set of characteristics, built layer by layer under maximum pressure, that would make survival possible when the impossible arrived. Discard the image you have in your head when you think of a Cretaceous mammal. The standard image, a tiny, shivering shrew hiding under a leaf while a T-Rex passes by, isn't completely wrong, but it's incomplete in a way that changes the whole story. The Cretaceous had dozens of distinct mammalian lineages. Many were creatures so strange you would have trouble recognizing them as mammals if you encountered them today. Let's start with the group almost everyone forgets, the multituberculates. They were named for the multiple tubercles on their molars, a dental structure that allowed them to process an extraordinary variety of foods, from hard seeds to insects to fibrous plant material. They looked like rodents in appearance but had no direct evolutionary relationship. Convergent evolution, two groups reaching the same solution via independent paths. They existed for over 100 million years. Modern humans have existed for 300,000 years. Multituberculates outlast us by a margin of 333 to 1. They weren't just persistent. A fossil found in Montana and described in 2020 revealed something that changed what paleontologists thought about Mesozoic mammal social behavior. Philocomes primaevus, a 5 million-year-old multituberculate, was found with multiple specimens together of different ages and sexes in a configuration researchers interpreted as a multi-generational family, adults, subadults, and offspring living and sleeping together in collective burrows. Complex social behavior, cooperative care. Far more sophisticated than anyone had expected to find in this period. Now go to the other end of the spectrum, Repenomamus giganticus. Discovered in China, it was about a meter long and weighed between 12 and 14 kilograms, the size of a medium dog. In 2005, a fossil was found with its stomach contents preserved, inside articulated bones of a young Psittacosaurus, a dinosaur. Repenomamus was not prey, it was a predator that hunted and ate baby dinosaurs. There were gliding mammals, Volaticotherium, essentially a Mesozoic flying squirrel with a gliding membrane between its limbs, living over 125 million years ago. There were mammals with adaptations for swimming. There were mammals specialized in subterranean insects with claws built for digging. The Cretaceous had a diversity of mammalian forms and behaviors that cultural clichés completely erase. And now we come to the question that will remain unanswered for a few minutes, because it is the heart of this story and deserves to be asked before it is answered. If there were mammals like this in the Cretaceous, mammals that hunted dinosaurs, that built multi-generational colonies, that glided between trees, why did almost all of them disappear along with the dinosaurs? What exactly did the impact demand to be crossed that even the best, largest, and most adaptable mammals of the Mesozoic couldn't offer? The answer is on the way. But first, the final paradox that makes everything even more disturbing. Most of these diverse and successful lineages did not survive the impact. Repenomamus did not survive. Gobiconodon did not survive. Volaticotherium did not survive. At the KPG boundary, the same iridium layer you can hold in your hand, most Cretaceous mammals simply disappear from the geological record. What survived was, in comparative terms, the most anonymous subset. The small, the generalists, the burrowers, those that ate almost anything. Not the most impressive mammals of the Cretaceous, the most invisible ones. And among the three major groups that reached the impact, monotremes, marsupials, and placentals, the placentals were statistically the most vulnerable group. Longer gestations, offspring that demanded intense investment, slightly larger size than marsupials on average. In any survival probability analysis, placentals should have been the first to go. In many regions they were. Populations collapsed catastrophically. So why do whales exist? Why do elephants exist? Why are you watching this video? To understand that, you first need to feel the full scale of what arrived. Because what was coming was not just an asteroid, it was a sequence of simultaneous and independent catastrophes. And the scale of this sequence was determined by a completely random geological detail that occurred in 30 seconds. The asteroid was about 12 kilometers in diameter. Manhattan, from tip to tip, is approximately 21 kilometers. It was an object more than half that length in every dimension, solid, compact, entering the atmosphere at 72,000 kilometers per hour. The energy released in the impact was equivalent to more than 1 billion Hiroshima-type nuclear bombs detonated simultaneously at the same point. It landed in the Yucatán Peninsula in Mexico. 30 seconds. That is what separated the world of dinosaurs from the world of mammals. The Yucatán Peninsula was covered at that time by a platform of sedimentary rock, rich in two minerals called anhydrite and gypsum, minerals extraordinarily rich in sulfur. The asteroid vaporized these rocks in seconds. It didn't just throw dust and fragments into the atmosphere. It injected between 325 and 540 gigatons of sulfur dioxide directly into the stratosphere. This number was confirmed in 2022 by researchers analyzing sulfur isotopes preserved in the KPG layer at multiple points across the globe, a chemical signature that could only come from a vaporization event of this specific scale. Sulfur dioxide in the stratosphere reacts with water vapor to form sulfuric acid aerosols. These aerosols reflect sunlight back into space with much greater efficiency than dust or soot. The result was a solar blockade that modern climate models estimate reduced the light reaching the surface to a tiny fraction for years. Some models point to up to 13 years of significant impact winter. If the asteroid had arrived 30 seconds earlier or later in its trajectory, it would have landed elsewhere. Deep oceans cover more than 70% of the planet. The deep ocean floor is basalt, with a minimal fraction of the sulfur found in the Yucatan sedimentary platforms. An oceanic impact would still have been catastrophic, but the impact winter would have been substantially less severe. The extinction would have happened on a different scale. The dinosaurs might have survived, 30 seconds on the clock of the universe. But the asteroid wasn't just destroying one planet, it was destroying two. The sulfuric aerosols combined with atmospheric moisture precipitated as global acid rain. The pH of the oceans dropped by approximately 0.25 units in less than 1,000 years. The pH scale is logarithmic. This drop represents an acidification of nearly 80% in hydrogen ion concentration. For organisms that build structures from calcium carbonate, shells, carapaces, calcareous skeletons, this change was lethal almost instantly. The planktonic foraminifera collapsed. These microorganisms were the base of practically the entire oceanic food chain. When they disappeared, the marine chain crumbled from the bottom up with the same implacable logic that the terrestrial chain would crumble from the top down. The KPG extinction was two independent extinctions happening on the same planet, by the same object, through entirely distinct mechanisms. On the Earth's surface, the sequence began with the heat pulse. The impact ejected vaporized rock beyond the atmosphere. It re-entered as a rain of incandescent ejecta on a global scale. The mechanism wasn't fire spreading, it was infrared radiation. The atmosphere, loaded with heated particles, radiated heat downward like an open oven on a continental scale. The surface heated up fast enough to ignite entire forests without a single direct flame. Animals exposed in the open received this heat directly onto their bodies. Within hours, vast regions of the planet were ablaze. The silence that followed was total, not the silence of a forest at night. The silence of a place where hours before there had been life in every direction, and now there was nothing moving. Those who survived the heat, those underground, underwater, or in protected environments, entered the second phase. The atmosphere was choked with soot, dust, and sulfur aerosols. Sunlight vanished. Global temperatures began to plummet. Imagine looking at the sky at noon and seeing something between grey and brown where blue should be. Not total darkness. Something worse. A light that looks right from a distance, but doesn't warm, doesn't truly illuminate, isn't enough for anything to grow. Without photosynthesis, plants stop growing. Those that survived the initial heat died of energy starvation within weeks. Without plants, the large herbivores began to starve. An adult triceratops needed dozens of kilograms of vegetation per day, an Edmontosaurus even more. Within weeks, available vegetation stocks became insufficient to sustain herbivore populations of multiple tons. Without herbivores, the large carnivores followed. An adult T-Rex needed hundreds of kilograms of meat per week. The prey died of hunger. The most powerful predator that ever lived starved to death in a world that had been entirely its own just 2 weeks earlier. The extinction of the most dominant animals in history wasn't spectacular. It was slow, cold, mathematically inevitable. In the middle of all this, underground on the banks of marshes, in burrows 30 centimeters below a destroyed planet, mammals were dying too. Not all, but almost all. Modern DNA analysis and the fossil record suggest that the placental lineage went through a bottleneck so extreme that the total number of living individuals on the planet may have dropped to a few tens of thousands. The entire lineage that would produce whales, elephants, horses, bats, dolphins, and humans was represented at the peak of the catastrophe by a group smaller than the population of a small town. Scattered across a destroyed planet, without sun, without a food chain, with acidified oceans and dead forests, every evolutionary logic said this lineage should have gone extinct. Why didn't it? The world is without sun, plants are dying, large animals are collapsing in a cascade, oceans are acidified, the cold arrives. You are a 150-gram mammal in a burrow, in the dark. How do you not die? The first answer is size, but not in the superficial way most people know. A 150-gram animal can survive on resources that are invisible as an energy source for a half-ton animal. Spores, individual larvae, fragments of decomposing organic matter, dormant roots. For a T-Rex, this isn't food, it's background noise. For a small generalist mammal, it's another day of life. The second answer lies in the soil, and it is the detail that transforms the story. The fossil record of the period immediately after the impact shows something that appears at multiple points around the world. An anomalous and sudden concentration of fungal spores in the sedimentary layer. Paleontologists call it the fungal spike. A global explosion of fungi that makes perfect sense when you think of the mechanism. Fungi do not depend on sunlight to grow. They feed on decomposing organic matter. There was decomposing organic matter on a continental scale, dead forests, dead animals, layers upon layers of dead vegetation. For fungi, the end of the world was the greatest banquet in history. Small generalist mammals ate fungi, not as an exclusive dish, but as part of a diet that included, without distinction, anything metabolically usable. At the exact moment the photosynthesis-based food chain collapsed, these animals accessed a new food chain that had emerged from the ruins of the old. The fungal spike was, for them, a lifeline that no one had planned and that no dinosaur had the structure to exploit. But there was something even older working in their favor. something built 150 million years earlier with no intention of serving this purpose. Remember what the nocturnal bottleneck did to mammals: hypersensitive smell, high-frequency hearing, vibrissae that map space without vision, operational capacity in absolute darkness. During the impact winter, the world went dark, not completely, but dark enough to seriously compromise animals dependent on high-resolution daytime vision. For these animals, the dark was hostile and disorienting. For small mammals, it was an extreme version of an environment they already knew. The post-impact world, cold, dark, chaotic, was, in sensory terms, the world that 150 million years of oppression had prepared them for. Not because they were superior to dinosaurs, because they had been forced to be functional in exactly this kind of hell for entire geological eras. Prolonged defeat had built, without any intention, a survival kit for the apocalypse. There was also torpor. The ability to enter states of metabolic torpor, primitive forms of hibernation, where metabolism drops drastically and the animal goes weeks without feeding, was present in many of the small mammals of the Cretaceous. A multi-ton dinosaur cannot pause its biological functions. The energy demand is too great. A 150-gram animal can hibernate for weeks, wake up, eat the equivalent of a few spores and larvae, and hibernate again. In a period of months and years of impact winter, this is the absolute difference between living and dying. Rivers, streams, and marshes survive disproportionately to the terrestrial ecological collapse. The reason is technical but crucial. Freshwater ecosystems depend not on active photosynthesis within the system, but on organic matter that falls in from the outside, organic fragments, dead animals, material carried by rain. They are systems based on detritus, not primary production. While terrestrial ecosystems were collapsing completely, these aquatic environments kept functioning, degraded but functioning. Mammals living near these environments had access to resources partially disconnected from the photosynthetic collapse. 5 simultaneous factors. None selected by evolution to survive asteroids, all selected to survive dinosaurs. And the two things, by a cosmic accident, required exactly the same set of adaptations. But the most counterintuitive piece has yet to be said. Remember that placentals were the most vulnerable group. Long gestations, high investment offspring, slightly larger, in theory, the first to die. And population-wise, they almost were. But those who survived carried, embedded in the very characteristic that made them vulnerable, a specific advantage for the world that emerged from the catastrophe. Long gestation and intense investment produce offspring that are more developed, cognitively more capable, and learn faster. In a stable environment like the Cretaceous, producing many cheap offspring can be more efficient. In a destroyed and unpredictable environment, where each individual needs to solve problems that never existed before, a capable and adaptable offspring outweighs a litter of fragile ones in every situation. The reproductive strategy of placentals, expensive, slow, intensely invested, was the wrong pattern for the right world and the right pattern for the destroyed world that had taken hold. A 2023 study from the University of Michigan confirmed that the mammals that survived the impact winter were predominantly burrowers and soil dwellers, not arboreal, not inhabitants of open forests. The forests had been destroyed by heat and photosynthetic collapse. The soil was the only functionally habitable refuge during the most extreme years. The group of animals that survived the greatest extinction event in recent Earth history was specifically concentrated in the soil, exactly the environment to which 150 million years of life under dinosaur pressure had adapted them. Oppression saved the oppressed. Everything that just happened, the catastrophe, the collapse, the improbable survival, has a scale. Numbers are the only way to truly feel that scale. 76% of all species on Earth were extinguished in the Age event. The Yucatán crater is 180 kilometers in diameter and over 20 kilometers deep, and it was only identified as an impact crater in the 1970s when satellite images revealed the circular pattern invisible from the surface. Throughout all previous human history, we lived on the scar of the greatest event of our lineage without knowing it existed. Between 325 and 540 gigatons of sulfur were injected into the stratosphere. The eruption of Mount Pinatubo in 1991, one of the largest of the 20th century, injected 20 megatons and caused a 0.5 degree drop in global temperature for a year. The KPG impact injected between 16,000 and 27,000 times more. Before the impact, fewer than 10 recognizable placental mammal families, all small, all nocturnal, all looking similar to each other. In less than 300,000 years after the impact, less than 0.5% of the time elapsed since then, mammals had already diversified into recognizably distinct forms. In 10 million years, they occupied practically all the large terrestrial ecological niches that once belonged to the dinosaurs. And about the multituberculates, a group that was the most successful mammal of the Mesozoic, that lived for 100 million years, that built complex social behavior, that survived the asteroid. They existed for another 30 to 35 million years after the KPG. They went extinct gradually, not because of a new asteroid, not because of a new catastrophe. They were extinguished by the placentals themselves, who became progressively more efficient at competing for the same resources. The longest-lived group of mammals that ever existed wasn't killed by the impact. It was killed by the survivors of the impact. The extinction of the multituberculates was the first silent act of the world we inherited. The world that emerged from the chaos was, in the first millions of years, a deeply strange place. The forests returned, but with new compositions, new species, new structures. The oceans recovered, with a completely different fauna. For the first time in 165 million years, there was no one to say that mammals couldn't. The niches were empty, the space was open, nature rushed to fill it. To understand the scale of what happened, you need just one example. An example so absurd, it summarizes everything that followed. About 50 million years ago, there was a hoofed land mammal about the size of a wolf that lived near rivers and ate aquatic plants at the water's edge. Over generations, its descendants spent more time in the water. Their hind legs became more adapted for swimming, their necks became sturdier, their nostrils migrated to the top of the skull. In less than 15 million years, an interval representing less than a quarter of the time since the impact, the descendants of that hoofed, plant-eating animal were becoming the largest living beings to ever exist in the history of the Earth. The whale, a land mammal that returned to the ocean and, in geological terms, by next week, was a 30-meter blue whale. This is what happens when evolution is given unrestricted space after 165 million years of suppression. While this was happening in the oceans, in the tropical forests that had regrown over the ashes, something was occurring in the brains of arboreal mammals. Fossil records document a significant acceleration in encephalization, the increase in relative brain size compared to the body in the first tens of millions of years of the Paleogene. Empty niches favor behavioral flexibility. Behavioral flexibility demands larger brains. With each generation, animals that learned faster, that adapted strategies, that solved new problems, had an advantage over those that could not. The asteroid didn't just open space for mammals, it created conditions that systematically favored, in every generation, progressively more intelligent animals. In a sense that is hard to describe without pausing, the asteroid started the evolutionary race that would produce intelligence. About 55 million years ago, in the recovering tropical forests, the first developed primates emerged, animals with forward-facing eyes, depth perception, hands with long fingers adapted for grasping branches, and the highest brain-to-body ratio mammals had yet developed. In the eyes of these animals, something was happening that hadn't happened in mammals in 150 million years. The primate retina developed a third type of cone, a mutation that partially restored trichromacy, the ability to distinguish red, green, and blue. Colors returned, resolution increased, the visual field gained depth. 150 million years of forced darkness had stolen from mammals the high-resolution retina of reptiles. The nocturnal bottleneck had left scars that would last for eras. But in the forests that grew over the ruins of the Cretaceous, in a branch of mammals that had learned to live in the trees, evolution began, slowly, partially, imperfectly, to return what had been lost. This is the full arc of this story. It begins with animals pushed into the dark by creatures larger and stronger, having their vision slowly stolen by evolution over eras, surviving shrunken and invisible for longer than the mind can process. It passes through 30 seconds on the clock of the universe that determined the worst possible place for an asteroid to fall, in an accident of geology that transformed a common catastrophe into a global-scale extinction. It passes through years of cold and darkness where survival was possible not by greatness, but by all the small and accidental ways that 150 million years of oppression had transformed fragile creatures into something resilient, without any of them knowing it. And it ends 66 million years later in a sequence of events that could not have been planned by any force of nature, with you. What you are today was not inevitable. It was a 30-second accident multiplied by 66 million years of consequences, built on the silent work of animals that never knew what they were building. That is what is preserved in that layer of clay you can hold in your hand.